Hey, welcome back. Today let's do a quick little studio tour and take a look around here. But while we get into it, I want to talk a little bit about this gear and gear in general. My last few videos have focused on one specific piece of gear, the Ableton Move, and how capable it is for making music on its own and for making music on the computer using Ableton Live. So if you're coming from those videos, you might be thinking to yourself, why does he need all this stuff? Can't he just make music using the computer or just a groove box? Maybe it seems like a lot of redundant gear and you're asking yourself, doesn't that stuff all do the same thing? And yeah, those are good points. There are amazing tools available today, and you can make great sounding music with very limited tool set. When I started out, I was recording music into cakewalk guitar tracks using a Radio Shack microphone sitting in a vase because I didn't have a microphone stand. And it was directly plugged via an adapter into that pink mic in mini jack socket on my family's PC. My first synth was this infomercial Miracle teaching keyboard that my high school was getting rid of. And it had 5-pin MIDI, and I was able to use that to control synths in Reason. When I started out, I was borrowing guitar pedals and amps and drum kits and all sorts of stuff from my youth group praise band. I was just using anything I could get my hands on. Now, was the music I was making any good? Kind of. Looking back, I made a lot of choices based on the gear and the software that was available and my knowledge of it at the time. Not all of those were smart choices. All right, fast forward to today. You can do full multi-track sessions with virtual instruments, professional samples, right on your smartphone or in a web browser. A lot of people have talked about how we need to go back, we need more limitations, that limitations breed creativity. And yeah, I'll admit, back in the day when I had all those limitations, when I was using very limited equipment, there were some magical moments. We made some music that I'm still really proud of. And that music was definitely a product of that very specific scenario. But it's my opinion that those moments happened in spite of the limitations and in spite of my inexperience. I got lucky capturing those moments, and I could have just as easily messed it all up, derailed the creative process, and screwed up everything. So, ever since I started out back in my parents' garage, I've been working to put together a studio where capturing those magical moments is less accidental. And I'm not trying to make music that is super polished. I still have a very raw and human element in all the music that I produce. But my goal is to not be completely boxed in by the limitations of my equipment. So the studio I've put together is centered around 3 core principles: encouraging creativity, quickly capturing ideas, and imparting a distinct character. When it comes to encouraging creativity, having instruments ready at hand is a crucial part of my creative process. I'm a multi-instrumentalist. My parents started me on violin when I was very young. I picked up other instruments as a teenager. Today, I'm not too precious about those specific instruments. Some of them have sentimental value, but I'm not a collector, I'm a user. And this isn't a museum, this is a studio. So having instruments out of their cases, ready to go, is really important to me. I'm also a bit of an electronics tinkerer and a sound design nerd, so things like guitar pedals, rack mount effects, preamps, spring reverbs, test equipment, tape machines, even modular gear, all those things fire up my creative brain in a special way. Now, alternatively, stuff like mic stands, cables, headphones, speakers, hard drives, shelving and storage, even audio interfaces, computers, and microphones, those things are super important when it comes to quickly and effectively capturing ideas. But at the end of the day, they are just tools. And I've come to think of them in a different way than my instruments or other creative devices in the studio. Back in the day, I got pretty caught up getting the best studio equipment I could afford, specifically with microphones. In hindsight, there's a good enough line that I sort of blew right past. I don't know if I could say universally where that line is, but if you're putting together your own studio, keep in mind that some things are just tools. They're unlikely to spark a new musical idea. So long as they stay out of the way and get the job done, then you're golden. And then there's gear in the studio that imparts a character that is specific to me, specific to my process, specific to my brain. They do a thing, they have a sound, and they work in maybe a specific or certain way. I've figured out what I like about them, what I don't like about them, and I use them to make a sound. They can sometimes make other sounds, but I often don't go down those other roads. Now, finding these character pieces isn't really an intentional process, at least not for me. It's trial and error. In my case, it's primarily been driven by budget and curiosity. I'm always on the lookout for cheap gear that is arguably pretty bad or outdated by today's standards. Often that means finding something and then quickly educating myself on what that obscure piece of gear is, reading old PDF manuals before I've even purchased it, getting to know its quirks and features, and then deciding if I'll roll the dice on it. Now, would I buy a studio classic like an 1176 or a Space Echo or a Jupiter or a Neumann if it were cheap at Goodwill? For sure, but that basically never happens to me. So I find other things and I learn about those things, and those things end up having a distinct character, and that character ends up being a part of my music. And this is the part where I do think limitations breed creativity, or more accurately for me, work breeds creativity. It's work to understand the limitations of a piece of gear. It's work to find ways around limitations. It's work to coax certain sounds out of a certain piece of gear. Sounds that were maybe never imagined by the manufacturers. Sometimes that work can get in the way of creativity, and sometimes that work is the creativity. I've found it's a balance. Now, even though I mentioned that most of my purchases are motivated by budget, I won't look you in the eye and tell you that this was cheap to put together. While most of the gear is secondhand and discounted, there have definitely been some items that I've purchased full price and brand new. I know that I'm incredibly lucky to have these tools in this tool set. My teenage self would probably throw up if he thought about the cumulative cost of my current studio. But for me, making music has been a lifelong career. I bought my first proper recording equipment with money saved from teaching guitar lessons and DJing school dances. I sold that gear and purchased slightly nicer or more interesting equipment. And then I did that again. And then I did that again. And then I did that again. I bought broken gear and fixed it sometimes, and often I sold it at a profit. I got here slowly, and over time I have found that gear has begun to stick around a little longer, and I've had less need to seek upgrades. I think I'm reaching a state of general equilibrium that I'm pretty happy with. These days I've got the tools to generate new ideas and then to capture and produce those ideas into pieces of music that sound like me. So yeah, that's what's driven me as I've put together my studio. I hope you enjoyed this little look into my creative process. Studios are ever evolving, and I'm sure I'll make some additions and subtractions in the future. But if you're starting out, hopefully this gave you some insight into what to prioritize and how to build your own studio. Like and subscribe if you want more videos like this. Thanks.